First things first, a massive thank you to all our brilliant listeners for tuning in and geeking out with us on everything from information security to AI and the occasional quantum rabbit hole. Your support keeps us caffeinated and curious. If you enjoy the show and want to help us keep the bites flowing, please like, subscribe, and share it with your fellow tech adventurers. Every click counts, and yes, we do check the stats obsessively. Today, we are undertaking a really critical deep dive into Medibank. They're obviously a huge pillar of the Australian health sector. We've basically synthesized a pretty significant stack of sources here. We're mainly focusing on their 2025 annual report, but also pulling in all the surrounding legal, regulatory, and cybersecurity analyses that came out of that infamous 2022 cyber event. Our mission today really is to cut through the noise, look at the results, and try to understand this profound tension between crisis, resilience, and transformation.
Yeah, that tension is absolutely the core narrative here. I mean, when you look at the source material, it's like you're presented with two fundamentally opposed realities sort of operating in parallel. On one side, you've got the enduring fallout, right? Systemic, costly, legally, financially, regulatorily from that massive security failure. We're talking millions of patient records exposed. But then on the other side, the company is actually showing significant business momentum. And they're pushing forward with this really ambitious strategic pillar, the drive to accelerate Australia's health transition. So they're fundamentally trying to pivot their identity, away from just being an insurer to becoming this broad integrated health provider.
So the big question, really, for you, the learner, is this. How exactly does a company recover from what looks like a catastrophic security failure, manage this enormous legal liability, and at the same time execute a fundamental restructuring of its risk posture, its technology, and its health delivery model, all simultaneously? It's a really compelling high-stakes case study in modern corporate resilience, isn't it? And this 2025 data, well, it gives us the first clear measured look at whether that whole pivot strategy is actually working. Okay, so let's unpack this. We probably need to start with the incident that really forced this whole strategic pivot, that 2022 cyber event. And this wasn't, some minor data leak. The breach was systemic. It led to the exfiltration and then the subsequent release on the dark web of records belonging to 9.7 million individuals. And crucially, this included highly sensitive personal health data, which just instantly elevates the risk profile, right?
Absolutely. And that event, well, it provided an immediate, pretty dramatic test case for privacy laws, not just in Australia, but globally. The fallout pretty quickly resulted in the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, that's the OAIC, essentially Australia's data and privacy watchdog, commencing civil penalty proceedings. Their core allegation is that Medibank failed to take reasonable steps to protect that data. And that's a direct breach of Australian Privacy Principle 11.1. This legal action, honestly, it's one of the biggest precedents being set right now for data protection liability.
Yeah, and what really strikes me, looking through the allegations, detail in the source material, is just how simple the initial vector seems to have been. I mean, this wasn't some super sophisticated zero-day attack exploiting unknown vulnerabilities. The failure points are consistently described as, well, the equivalent of cyber hygiene 101.
Precisely. That's the alarming part, isn't it? The OAIC's filings, they specifically call out several key deficiencies that apparently made the compromise relatively straightforward. The most glaring error cited was the alleged lack of multi-factor authentication, MFA, for privileged access to sensitive systems. Now, for an organization holding millions of health records, I mean, that's just the foundational layer of security. It really shouldn't have been missing.
And that failure in basic access control, it immediately highlights the critical role of, the third-party ecosystem in modern breaches.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. Coupled with the MFA failure, the documents point towards poor handling of third-party credentials. The specific route alleged was that credentials got compromised via a third-party saved information. And apparently, this was synchronized to a compromised personal device. It just underscores this really uncomfortable truth, doesn't it?
In today's interconnected world, the risk posture of your most critical vendor can very easily become your own risk posture. Medibank owned the data risk ultimately, even if that initial compromise originated outside its direct control, outside its walls.
And it wasn't just the initial compromise route. There was also a process failure, it seems. Like they had systems designed to detect intrusion, but then they failed to act on the warnings. Yes, exactly. The sources allege that the intrusion activity actually did trigger security alerts internally, which means the tech at some level worked. But, and this is crucial, these alerts were apparently not acted upon appropriately or quickly enough, and that delay allowed the threat actor prolonged undetected access, which ultimately led to the successful exfiltration of that massive data haul. So it was really a compounding failure, wasn't it? First, a technological gap, the missing MFA. Second, a supply chain vulnerability. And third, a failure of the actual detection and response protocols, human process failure.
Okay, so moving from the technical side of the failure to the legal consequences. The sheer scale of this regulatory and litigation quagmire seems immense. Can you maybe outline the main ongoing legal pressures detailed in the sources?
Yeah, there are two major battles still ongoing. First, you've got those OAIC civil penalty proceedings we mentioned. The OAIC is alleging the interference with privacy was serious and repeated. Now, the potential penalty calculation here is what really captures the scale of this failure. At the time, the law stipulated penalties of up to $2.2 million per contravention. Now, if you apply that figure to the 9.7 million affected individuals, and we have to stress, this is a theoretical maximum, not a likely outcome, you arrive at a number that's been described in legal circles as potentially reaching, wait for it, $21 trillion.
$21 trillion. I mean, that number is just a stunning thought experiment, isn't it? It really captures this sort of abstract, almost existential nature of mass data liability. It really forces us to ask, what actually is the price ceiling on customer trust and privacy?
Well, it definitely serves as a clear global warning signal. While, the final penalty will undoubtedly be far, far lower, probably in the millions or maybe hundreds of millions, definitely not trillions. That maximum figure really demonstrates the regulatory severity being assigned to the alleged privacy breach. Then the second front is this flurry of representative complaints and class actions. These claims are seeking compensation for the victims, including for non-economic loss like distress, emotional injury, injury to feelings, that kind of thing. Medibank is actively defending against these actions. And critically, Medibank actually failed in its bid to try and restrain the OAIC investigation until after those federal court proceedings were concluded, which just confirms the regulator's aggressive enforcement posture and its ability to keep investigating without being held up.
Wow. So the technical failure and the local legal action were obviously significant enough, but then the international response was quite unique, wasn't it? Sort of escalated this from just a corporate crisis into a genuine geopolitical event.
Yeah, what's really fascinating here is the coordinated geopolitical response. It was clearly aimed at deterrence. The attack itself was specifically attributed to a Russian criminal actor, someone with known links to the infamous REvil ransomware ecosystem. And then, in what was actually a rare and highly coordinated display of international action against cybercriminals, Australia, the US, and the UK imposed trilateral sanctions on the alleged individual involved, Aleksandr Ermakov. This signaled that governments are really escalating their response beyond just traditional law enforcement methods. They're leveraging diplomatic and economic tools now to penalize ransomware operators directly.
So, okay, given all this history, the ongoing liability, what is the explicit financial cost of the incident that Medibank has actually been forced to absorb and report in their latest 2025 annual report?
Well, the explicit cost is significant, and it's clearly ongoing. It really reinforces the idea that remediation isn't a quick fix. It's a multi-year project. The annual report confirms $39.7 million in non-recurring cybercrime costs were booked in FY25 alone, just in that 1 year. And this covers a complex mix of things. Further, IT security uplift, professional services fees, legal costs, and other costs related to all those regulatory investigations and the litigation tied to the 2022 event. But crucially, the banking regulator, APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, also required Medibank to set aside a substantial $250 million of capital specifically for security remediation following the breach. That's basically money that's quarantined, it's unavailable for other uses until APRA is satisfied that the systemic issues have actually been fixed.
Right, that $250 million quarantine mandated by APRA.
Yeah.
The scale of the cleanup involved there is just massive. So here's where we pivot, I guess, from the problem to the solution, or at least the attempted solution. The technical cleanup is one thing, obviously. But the shift from just reactively fixing things to building proactive resilience, well, that must be fundamentally altering their operational DNA, right? Let's look at the institutional changes. Maybe starting with those technical quick fixes they deployed immediately after the breach was confirmed.
Yeah, the initial steps were purely defensive. They had to be urgent. Back in mid-October 2022, they took the affected systems offline immediately. They reset every affected credential they could find, reissued secrets, and then aggressively hunted down and removed any saved credentials linked to those compromised personal devices we talked about. Those were really necessary emergency measures, Stop the bleeding, secure the perimeter as quickly as possible.
Okay, but the long-term work, that must be about fundamentally changing the whole operational environment, especially given, as you said, the simple nature of the initial exploit. So what defines their comprehensive uplift aimed at preventing this happening again?
Well, the goal clearly moved beyond just plugging the obvious holes. It shifted towards establishing a more mature, institutionalized security posture. Their comprehensive uplift focuses on strengthening core cybersecurity services, maturing their risk management frameworks, and, crucially, aligning their entire enterprise security program with an internationally recognized standard, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF 2.0. Aligning with NIST gives them a really comprehensive structure, for identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, and recovering from cyber incidents. It covers the whole life cycle, and they poured investment into key areas, enhancing their Security Operations Center, the SOC bolstering network security, improving vulnerability management processes, and completely overhauling their identity and access management, or IAM, capabilities.
That focus on IAM seems like a very direct response to the lack of MFA and the poor credential handling that allowed the breach in the first place. Makes sense. But what about architectural changes? Changes that assume an attacker will eventually get inside the network somehow.
Yes. And that's the philosophical shift that's really central to modern cybersecurity defense, isn't it? Moving away from just relying on perimeter security towards internal segmentation. Assume breach. The sources confirm they are explicitly moving toward implementing zero trust principles. This basically means strictly verifying every user, every device, every application trying to access resources, regardless of whether they're inside or outside the network perimeter. Trust nothing, verify everything. They are also implementing microsegmentation and much stricter separation of critical systems. This is vital, because if an attacker does manage to compromise credentials again, like they did with that third-party sync issue, microsegmentation ensures they can't just easily move laterally from that compromised endpoint to the critical data stores, the ones containing those 9.7 million patient records. It effectively walls off the crown jewels. It demonstrates a huge technical uplift compared to where they presumably were before.
Okay, this all sounds like a really serious technology mandate. But the OAIC allegations, they also pointed to a failure of process and human response. Remember those disregarded alerts. Technology alone only gets you halfway there, right? So, did they institutionalize this focus within the organization's actual governance structure?
They absolutely did. And honestly, this shift in governance is arguably the most insightful part of the entire recovery effort documented in the sources. They are actively shifting the company's internal mindset, moving away from seeing technology as solely about value protection, just stopping bad things, to seeing it as a necessary foundation for value creation through strategic maturity. The board itself oversaw the adoption of new, stricter governance standards. This includes APRA's new Operational Risk Management Standard, CPS 230 implementation, and also the government's recently introduced Financial Accountability Regime, or FAR.
Right, the Financial Accountability Regime, that's a potential game changer for corporate Australia, isn't it? For our international audience, maybe just explain why adopting the FAR is so crucial in this specific context.
It's absolutely crucial because it effectively stops institutional blame shifting and mandates individual responsibility. That's the core idea. The FR places clear, legally defined obligations and accountability directly onto senior executives and board members for failures in risk management. And that explicitly includes cyber and operational risk. Before the FIR, failures might just be absorbed by the corporation as a whole. Now, individual executives can face serious personal consequences, including potential disqualification from managing companies. So this drastically raises the personal stakes for governance compliance, particularly when it comes to things like data security controls.
Okay, so how does that kind of high-level change actually get embodied in the day-to-day culture? For the average employee or team leader, how do you even measure the success of this new governance approach?
Well, it seems to be embedded through an updated risk culture framework. And this was designed specifically to promote what they call a security-first culture. And importantly, this isn't just some passive training module you click through once a year. It defines specific behaviors the company mandates and actually measures. First, sound decision-making and accountability. This means people are explicitly responsible for decisions that impact customers, patients, or the organization itself. No hiding. Second, and this is perhaps the most difficult one to actually measure, is confidence to speak up. They're trying to ensure a safe environment where people feel they can ask tough questions, encourage debate, and talk openly about potential risks, like those security alerts that were apparently ignored.
That concept, actively trying to measure confidence to speak up, that's fascinating. It really implies a recognition that security failures often start with those internal warnings that get dismissed, maybe due to fear or just an overwhelming workload, right?
Exactly. They seem to be trying to remove that cultural inertia, that reluctance to raise flags, which can lead to overlooked alerts becoming major incidents. The third mandated behavior they list is leadership and continuous learning. This commits staff to constantly improving their capabilities in subject matter areas critical to their role, specifically calling out things like privacy, information security, and data governance. So this integrated approach, it really confirms that their definition of reasonable steps now includes a mandatory cultural component, one that's subject to executive performance review.
Okay, shifting focus slightly here. Beyond just fixing the legacy issues from the breach, Medibank is also leveraging cutting-edge technology, like AI, as part of its growth engine. What measurable role is AI actually playing in this transformation, according to the reports?
Yeah, AI is definitely central to their strategy to modernize their platforms for better scalability, efficiency, and agility. And the sources reveal some quite tangible customer-facing results already. For instance, they apparently achieved a 60% reduction in complaint resolution time, and this was through AI-assisted processes that help route issues more effectively and provide agents with faster, more accurate information to resolve problems. Furthermore, they report having a pretty substantial fleet of 52 machine learning and AI models now embedded across the business. These are doing everything from automating operational efficiencies to enabling more personalized customer health interactions.
Okay, that is massive efficiency being realized from technology investment.
Yeah.
But, handling 9.7 million user records, many of them highly sensitive health details, means deploying AI carries its own set of pretty profound ethical and security risks, surely.
Absolutely. That tension demanded a parallel governance response. You can't just deploy AI widely without considering the risks, especially with health data. So, to mitigate those new risks inherent in using AI with sensitive health data, they launched a formal AI governance policy. And this policy explicitly incorporates ethical AI principles, ensures robust privacy protections are built in, embeds security standards from the start, and outlines clear risk management guidelines for any AI project. This governance structure really reflects an understanding that as they accelerate their health delivery using AI, they absolutely need a robust, accountable layer to ensure the secure and ethical handling of all that sensitive data feeding those 52 models.
All right, so despite those staggering cyber costs we talked about, the nearly $40 million non-recurring hit, the $250 million APRA quarantine, the ongoing legal liability hanging over them from Section 1 of financial performance of Medibank is, well, surprisingly robust. Let's try and address that core financial tension. How do they actually manage such strong performance while absorbing these really significant costs?
Yeah, that is the critical question, isn't it? And the source material suggests that the underlying core business, the private health insurance or PHI business, is just incredibly strong. It's essentially providing a financial firewall against the cyber fallout. The key financial results for FY25, they show recovery and strength. Group revenue was up 5.2% to $8.6 billion. That's $8,604 million. And critically, the group underlying net profit after tax, or NPAT, which is their preferred measure of core operational profitability, that increased by a substantial 8.5% to $618.7 million. This sustained profitability is really what's funding those multi-year security investments and also their big expansion into broader health services.
Wait a minute, though. They booked almost $40 million in non-recurring cyber costs, just in FY25, plus they had that capital set aside for remediation. Is the source material basically suggesting the core insurance business is so profitable that they can essentially absorb these massive failures as just a high, albeit manageable, cost of doing business?
That is precisely the implication, yes. The high NPAT growth demonstrates that their customer base and the pricing structure within the core insurance market have largely insulated the company financially from the operational and, frankly, the reputational hits of the breach. It definitely shows resilience, but maybe it also highlights the market concentration and the inherent profitability within the private health insurance sector in Australia.
Okay, let's talk about restoring trust. One of the most visible things they did to demonstrate commitment to customers, especially after the pandemic and then the cyber incident, has been this massive financial giveback. That number's pretty eye-watering.
It is a remarkable figure, yes. And it's clearly a major strategic move designed to shore up customer loyalty after everything that happened. They finalized that huge COVID-19 support package, and it reached a record $1.71 billion returned directly to customers. Billion, with a B. This was delivered through a mix of things, cash givebacks, but also using their Live Better Rewards points system. And the sources confirm this is the largest financial giveback of any Australian health insurer ever. And furthermore, beyond that huge macro figure, they also highlight that customers save more than $28 million in out-of-pocket costs just this year, simply by using participating providers in their networks, like Members' Choice Advantage and other no-gap network arrangements. So this focuses on delivering tangible, immediate value back to the customer.
Right. And the strategic goal here isn't just to be a profitable insurer anymore. It's to fundamentally drive and accelerate Australia's health transition, as they put it. Let's talk a bit more about their Expand in Health pillar and the scale of their Amplar Health network now.
Yeah, this is where their strategy really starts to differentiate itself from traditional insurance. The Expand in Health strategy is focused squarely on shifting care towards things like prevention, primary care, virtual health, and importantly, home care. It's about moving away from the expensive, reactive, hospital-centric model that dominates healthcare. And the scale they've achieved now through their Amplar Health network is actually massive. It delivered 4.3 million health interactions and consultations just in FY25. That firmly establishes Amplar as one of Australia's largest networks of integrated health professionals, operating somewhat independently but owned by Medibank.
And that shift into home care specifically seems to have a palpable, measurable impact on the traditional hospital system, which we know is constantly under pressure, especially post-pandemic. How successful have these programs actually been in alleviating that burden on hospitals?
Extremely successful, according to their reporting. The home care programs delivered by Amplar Health are actively addressing those hospital pressures. They do this by facilitating earlier discharge for patients and providing more acute care outside of the hospital facility itself. They claim to have saved a verifiable 177,000 hospital bed days during the year. That's a huge number. Furthermore, they delivered over 254,000 home care visits, significantly expanding the scope of acute care that can be delivered right in the patient's own residence. And this diversification, it isn't just theory. We see really practical examples, like apparently 30% of their no-gap joint replacement patients are now having their rehabilitation delivered at home. That moves costly procedures out of the traditional hospital setting while, ideally, maintaining the quality of care.
And technology is deeply embedded in this home care service too, isn't it? Making it more accurate and efficient. That specific anecdote you mentioned about chronic wound care, that really illustrates how the AI investment we discussed earlier translates directly into frontline patient care.
Yeah, it's a perfect micro example of how technology can drive better health outcomes. So nurses conducting home visits for chronic wound management are now using AI. Specifically, they mention the Net Health Tissue Analytics app integrated right into their workflow. They basically use their phones or tablets to take a photo of the wound, and the app uses machine learning to precisely calculate the wound dimensions and even the color composition. This technological assist helps reduce measurement variance between nurses, enhances accuracy over time, and it streamlines the chronic wound management reporting back to the central care team, which is vital when you consider they made over 50,000 home visits just for wound care alone this year.
Wow. And beyond physical health, Medibank has also made a substantial long-term commitment to mental health, recognizing that critical need, which is obviously global.
Yes, their commitment there is backed by some serious funding. They've pledged an investment of $50 million specifically into mental health over the next 5 years. And the focus seems quite comprehensive. They're aiming to increase access, foster innovation in delivery, and also work on prevention. A key component they highlight is the expansion of the virtual psychology clinic. This is operated by Amplar Health, and it's now accessible to Medibank customers, providing psychological support that is often faster and cheaper to access than traditional in-person options, which can have long wait lists.
Okay, finally then, let's try and tie all this growth back to the actual customer experience. How engaged are the policyholders with this expanded vision of health, beyond just insurance? And how is the company demonstrating operational improvements in how they interact with customers?
Well, customer engagement is really the ultimate barometer of success for this whole health transition strategy, isn't it? And the sources confirm that more than half of Medibank policyholders are now apparently engaging with health and well-being services that go beyond just their core insurance policy. So they are using these extra services. Digital engagement is accelerating rapidly, too. That's evidenced by a reported 20% increase in unique users of the My Medibank app just in the last year. Operationally, they point to changes like reorganizing customer support into geographically located hubs and establishing autonomous teams within their budget brand. And they claim these have yielded demonstrable results. Customer advocacy is now apparently at a 3-year high. They also maintained a focus on employee welfare, which is interesting. They expanded their popular 4-day workweek trial to 500 employees. And they reported that participants were happier, healthier, and crucially, also more efficient in their roles.
Okay, so we've tracked the crisis, the cleanup, and the growth, which seems fueled by the strength of the core business. Now, let's look at the mechanisms designed to make sure this kind of crisis never repeats. Accountability, right at the very top. Given the implementation of the Financial Accountability Regime, FAR, we talked about, and the OAIC's focus on governance failures in the breach, what specific steps has Medibank taken to integrate cyber and operational risk directly into how executives get paid?
Right. This section really confirms that those cultural changes we discussed earlier, like speaking up, haven't just been left as soft initiatives. They've been solidified into enforceable financial rules. Hard rules. Executive remuneration is now explicitly linked to the overarching risk management framework and the company's code of conduct. And the key innovation here, the really interesting part, is this mandatory hurdle they've established. For a short-term incentive, STI award basically, the annual bonus to be made to any employee, and that includes all executives, that individual must pass a mandatory risk, compliance, and behavior gateway.
Wow, okay, that is significant. So just to put it simply, even if an executive delivers exceptional financial results, like that 8.5% NPAT growth we just discussed, that won't guarantee them a bonus if that same individual fails on security compliance or breaches the required ethical behavior standards set out in the framework.
Exactly that. Failure to pass that gateway results in immediate ineligibility for the STI award for that year. Doesn't matter how many profit targets were smashed. This mechanism sends an absolutely undeniable message right across the organization. Non-financial risk management, especially things like cyber risk, privacy, data governance, is now considered a threshold competence for leadership.
Yeah.
It's positioned as a mandatory foundation, not just, some desirable quality or a nice to have.
Okay, and what happens if serious issues or maybe misconduct are discovered after the bonus has already been paid out? Is there any recourse then?
Yeah, that's where the real teeth of their governance policy come in. They specifically updated and strengthened their Maglosin clawback policy in FY25. This policy provides the board with the necessary discretion, and crucially the power, to either reduce or cancel variable remuneration before it vests, that's the Maglos part, or to actually recover it after it has been paid out, that's the clawback. And this is applied in specific defined circumstances, such as proven misconduct, a material breach of that risk culture framework we talked about, or a significant failure in risk management that causes material detriment to the company or its customers. So they can potentially take the money back.
This whole detailed governance structure, it strongly suggests that the company is really aiming to prove, quite publicly, to regulators like the OAIC and APRA, that they are now taking risk and compliance accountability more seriously than ever before. Tangibly so. So let's review the actual report card then. Based on the long-term incentive, or LTI, performance outcomes that were tested as of June 2025, what did the executives actually achieve on their long-term goals, the ones established way back in 2023, before some of this was fully implemented?
Right, so the 2023 LTI grants, they concluded their 3-year performance period recently. The total vesting outcome across all measures was 68.6%, so not 100%, but still a significant portion vested. The results were a bit mixed, but they showed very strong financial execution, even despite that cyber overhead we've been discussing. The earnings per share compound annual growth rate, or EPS CAGR, measure that accounted for 30% of the total award weight and basically measures profit growth per share over time that achieved 100% vesting, full marks. They hit a result of 12.5% CAGR, which significantly exceeded the 7% threshold they needed for maximum vesting on that component. Strong profit growth.
And how did they fare against their competitive landscape in terms of shareholder value compared to similar companies?
On the relative total shareholder return, TSR measure, which was also weighted at 30%, they achieved near maximum vesting again, coming in at 96%. This performance ranked them at the 73rd percentile against their specified comparator group, which is the ASX 100 index, but excluding the volatile mining and energy sectors. So again, high achievement on underlying profit growth and strong outperformance relative to other comparable large companies on the stock exchange.
However, there was one specific strategic area related directly to their core market where they seem to have struggled to hit the vesting targets. And that seems important given their strategic expansion plans we discussed.
That's right. That was the private health insurance PHI market share growth measure. This accounted for 20% of the total LTI award. The target here required a minimum growth threshold of 25 basis points. That's 0.25% of market share growth just for any vesting to occur. And given the market conditions described, really high switching rates between insurers, intense competitive pressure, the report indicates it is highly likely there will be no vesting at all against this particular measure. They didn't hit the minimum growth target.
That failure to grow market share, that feels strategically relevant, doesn't it? It sort of suggests that even while their profitability and shareholder returns are high, the core insurance business itself is operating in a fiercely competitive environment where just maintaining, let alone growing, market presence is incredibly difficult right now, which presumably adds even more pressure for that Amplar Health expansion to deliver the future growth for the company.
It does. It really confirms that the financial success we're seeing is likely driven more by things, efficiency gains, customer retention strategies, and perhaps pricing power, rather than by aggressive market share expansion in that core insurance product. And yeah, it absolutely reinforces the necessity of that expand in health strategy as a crucial future growth driver, because growth in the saturated core insurance market is proving very, very challenging indeed. Hashtag tag outro. So summing up this deep dive, it really reveals a striking narrative, doesn't it? A story of corporate recovery under pretty extreme duress. Medibank found itself under intense external pressure, facing those trilateral sanctions, multiple class actions, the looming threat of severe regulatory penalties from the OAIC, while simultaneously executing this robust internal security and governance overhaul. An overhaul costing nearly $40 million in non-recurring expenses in FY25 alone, plus that huge $250 million APRA remediation quarantine hanging over them.
And yet, somehow, they achieved strong underlying financial performance. That 8.5% growth in underlying NPAT is significant, and that financial strength successfully funded their radical pivot towards becoming this diversified, integrated health provider. The massive expansion of Amplar Health, the push into virtual care, into home care services, it isn't just about diversification anymore, is it? It's clearly about repositioning the entire company to lead Australia's health transition, as they call it, and demonstrating that their investments are already delivering quantifiable savings and efficiencies back into the health system, like saving those 177,000 hospital bed days.
I think the clearest takeaway, though, when you look at the intersection of the cyber failure and the subsequent governance changes, is the significantly elevated standard of accountability that's being established here, both internally and likely externally. The OAIC's civil penalty proceedings, they ultimately hinge on defining what truly constitutes reasonable steps for protecting customer data under Australia's Privacy Act. That's the legal test.
Right. And by explicitly reporting on their updated risk culture framework, and specifically linking executive compensation directly to passing that mandatory risk, compliance, and behavior gateway, Medibank is effectively demonstrating very publicly that the new post-breach standard for reasonable steps extends far beyond just technical controls like MFA or firewalls. It now institutionally embeds security deep into the corporate culture, into individual accountability, and right into top-level executive reward mechanisms.
Yeah, so the price of resilience, therefore, it's not just the multi-million-dollar remediation cost, is it? It's also the institutionalization of security behavior as a mandatory condition of employment and reward right up to the top. It completely shifts the responsibility for data governance onto the shoulders of accountable individuals, backed by financial consequences.
So what stands out to you when considering the price of resilience and how accountability is now potentially being defined by your wallet? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Medibank's dual focus on crisis recovery and health revolution. We'll catch you next time.